Hi, my name is Tristan Long, and today I'm going to be talking about euthanasia. And I'm going to talk about a case of euthanasia in the Netherlands where they have legalized it. An argument by James Rachels against the unsoundness of the conventional doctrine of the AMA, and an argument from Daniel Callahan, who argues several different points about why euthanasia is wrong and should not be allowed. So first, I'm going to be looking at a case in the Netherlands. They have legalized euthanasia in patients with severe dementia, and they say that a physician may carry out a written request beforehand for euthanasia in people with advanced dementia, so when dementia has become very severe. And they don't have to have fear of prosecution, even if the patient no longer expresses a wish to die. That is a very important point, which Callahan will bring up later in his argument. So in this case, a woman had given consent to be euthanized before her disease had advanced to a very severe state. And when it had advanced to a severe state, she no longer expressed a wish to die, which at that point they believed that her will and her mind had been compromised. And so the doctor carried forth with euthanasia. And then, of course, he was prosecuted for that, but because of the law there, and that the court ended up ruling that a physician may carry out the written request of euthanasia, even with people who no longer express a wish to die. And of course, there are very strict rules that go along with this. The patient must have unbearable and endless suffering, and at least two doctors must have conferred and both agreed to carry out the procedure. And of course, the patient must have given written consent. And therefore, because of all these different things, the doctor was acquitted of any wrongdoing. He was not charged. And that is the case that I looked at. And next, we'll be looking at an argument around the topic of euthanasia, but specifically at the unsoundness of the conventional doctrine of the AMA. Now, this doctrine states that there is a huge difference between active and passive euthanasia. Active being when you actively kill someone, you give a lethal injection. Passive is when you just let someone die. You do not go forth with any more treatment. You let nature, you let the disease take them. And the doctrine states that there is such an important moral difference between the two. Although the latter is sometimes permissible, the former is always forbidden. So that passive can be allowed, but active is never allowed. And Rachels disagrees with this term, with this claim. He brings up the example of a baby, and what if this child has, is a lot going wrong with it, it will probably eventually end up dying, and to do that, it's going to have to go through a lot of pain and suffering. So this is what Rachel states on this. He said, I can understand why some people are opposed to all euthanasia, and he understands why he thinks such is meant to try to be allowed to live. But he doesn't understand what the conventional doctrine states, which is that passive euthanasia would be allowed, and that would be in favor of destroying, and that would be in favor of letting dehydration and infection, wither over time, this baby, and that's what the doctrine states, that they may be allowed to dehydrate and wither, but may not be given an injection to end its life and suffering. And he says that that's extremely cruel. He believes that is extremely wrong. And then he looks at two different examples with a man named Smith. One, Smith has a son in the bathtub. He wants to collect his life insurance. His motive is to collect life insurance. So he drowns the kid. He sticks his head under the water. But in the second example, he still wants the same things, exact same thing, same motives, except this time the kid hits his head and he just watches the kid drown. He doesn't do anything to help the child. Rachel states, if letting die were in itself less bad than killing, this defense should have at least some weight, but it does not. Such a defense can only be regarded as a grotesque perversion of moral reasoning. Morally speaking, it is no defense at all, and doctors are in a similar but different situation. They have no personal gain. If a doctor lets a patient die, this is what he states, for humane reasons, he is in the same moral position as if he had given the patient a lethal injection for humane reasons. If the decision was wrong, and the patient's was curable, the decision would be equally regrettable, no matter which method was carried out. And if it was wrong, then the method that was used is not important. So Daniel Callahan argues a different side. in his essay, and he goes through several different points about why legalizing euthanasia would be wrong. And the first is that it opens up a door to what he calls consenting adult killing. And when that door is open, there's a lot of different questions and a lot of things morally that can be asked that he doesn't think need to be brought up in society. His second point is about self-determination and whether it is okay for you to give your life to another person, for them to take your life. If that is okay, if that is an okay power for you to give to them. And his third is about what medicine is supposed to do. Is medicine, is supposed to help people and heal people. It should not, have the ability to take away life. And he's going to argue against four different claims: the moral claim of an individual and self-determination, the moral relevance, the difference between killing and letting die, the supposed paucity of evidence to show the harmful consequences of euthanasia, and the compatibility of euthanasia and medical practice. He's arguing against these 4 points. The first one is waiving your right to life, giving away your right to another person. Life shouldn't be something that you should be able to give to another person. If 3 people have the same disease and the same suffering, and only one person believes that they should be that they want to die, like how can a doctor decide if a patient's life is no longer worth living just because a patient says so? And then he talks about the difference between causality and culpability, and that these two things are very different. And he says, what's the mistake here? It lies in confusing these two things and in failing to note the way in which human societies have overlaid natural causes with moral rules and interpretations. So the first, he has two different points to say about this. When the action of a physician in stopping treatment of a patient with an underlying lethal disease is constructed as causing death. On the contrary, the physician's omission can only bring about death on the condition that the patient's disease will kill him in the absence of treatment. The second is when we fail to note that judgments of moral responsibility and culpability are human constructs. They are something we created. So this third point he argues against is the consequences, and here's when he brings up the Dutch court case of euthanasia, and he calls this non-voluntary euthanasia. And he believes this is abuse of the law, that it is not, it should never be okay. If someone says they do not want to die, they should not. Just because they said beforehand that they wanted euthanasia, that does not mean that the court and the law has any right to say that it was okay for them to go ahead and do that. And it goes into his next point about the difficulty precisely writing and then enforcing the law, and then of course the inherent slipperiness of moral reasons for legalizing euthanasia. In the first place, and the last thing he looks at, is the nature of medicine, and that it's not medicine. He states that it is not medicine's place to lift us from the burden of that suffering, which turns on the meaning we assign to the decay of the body. It's not medicine's place to determine when lives are not worth living anymore. Doctors are there to alleviate pain and suffering, to help alleviate disease, but that is where their actions should stop. They should not be able to kill another person. So we've looked at the case in the Netherlands, where they have legalized euthanasia, James Rachel's argument for the unsoundness of the doctrine, the conventional doctrine of the AMA, and Daniel Callahan's points and arguments about why euthanasia is wrong.